our assignments were put on the bulletin board, outdoors bulletin board, and I got down to my name, and it had 11 Bravo, which was an infantry MOS. And I turned to the guy next to me and I said, what does 11B stand for? And he said, it stands for you're screwed. And I think at that point, that's when Vietnam started. I started paying attention.
How old were you when you arrived in Vietnam?
I was 20. I turned 20 April 14th of 67, and I think I got to Vietnam in the middle of May of 67. So I was just barely 20.
So you arrive in Vietnam in May 67 as an E3. 7 months later, you're a Staff Sergeant E6.
Right.
That is, obviously incredibly rapid advancement in rank. What explains that? What explains that rapid rise in rank for you?
Just a few days after I got out to the field, my platoon leader asked me to be his radio telephone operator. And so I accepted. And for about the next 4 months, I was an RTO for my lieutenant. And he was a West Point graduate, class of 1965, airborne ranger, really, really smart and really brave. And so he spent a lot of time with me talking about all the support that he had at his disposal, like artillery, like air, like helicopters. And he taught me the correct procedures for calling that in. He said when somebody calls in a mission, there's nobody checks your rank. Mm-hmm. And so he said, if something happens to me, I'm really teaching you to be there for the platoon until somebody can take over. And so I learned all that, and plus he used to give me tests, practical tests. We'd stop for a break, and he'd say, if we got hit right now, what would you do? What would you have the platoon do? And I would tell him, and then he would correct me or expand my knowledge. And so he spent a lot of time with me, teaching me to be cognizant of all that I had available to me. And also by watching him, I was taught leadership, because he was not a stay behind guy. When something happened, my lieutenant was right up front. And so since I had to be within arm's length of him at all times, he drugged me to some pretty hot places. But I did learn that the one thing that I kept with me the rest of my time there, and that is a leader cannot lead from the rear. You have to be up front and involved. After he left the field, I was sent up to the command post, CP, and I became the head radio operator. And I hurt my back on a fall off of a log bridge. And when I came back, I told the captain I couldn't carry a radio anymore. But that wasn't particularly true. I could have, but I thought our captain was pretty inept. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to go back to my platoon, and I did. And when I got back out, I outranked the squad leader whose squad they put me in. So I became a squad leader. And that's when events started testing my mettle. I hadn't been a squad leader but 2 or 3 days. And my platoon leader sent me and 2 of my guys out for a little reconnoiter. Close. We went out about 2,000 meters, I guess, and we ran into 2 snipers. And so there were three of us and two of them, and the sniper fire was pretty accurate. And I immediately got behind some cover, and I looked at my guys, and they looked at me, and they took off and started pursuing the enemy and laying cover fire down. And I laid there for a minute, and I thought that, this is not right. You cannot lay here and let your guys do the work. So it was almost like it made me ashamed of what I had, done by getting down. And so I thought, well, here it goes. I either am going to stand up and be involved and be with the people that are in my squad, or I'm going to be one of these guys that crawls in a hole when the bullets start flying. So I chose the former, and that's the way I was. From then on out, I was an upfront kind of guy. And anytime we drew fire, I moved up to be where it was coming in.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you do rise very, very rapidly in rank. And also, something that comes up several times in the first part of your memoir is you say that when you arrived in Vietnam, you just assumed that you weren't going to survive. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between those two things. I mean, did your assumption that you weren't going to survive, did that then lead to a thought process of, well, I'm not going to make it, so I might as well be as upfront as I can while I'm still here? I mean, is there a connection in your mind between those things? I'm sorry?
I said, I thought about that. That thought did come into my head, but I don't think that was the motivation. The reason that I thought that I wouldn't survive was when I first got there, me and 4 or 5 other guys flew out on the helicopter with the evening chow helicopter, and we got off the helicopter, and I got assigned to the 3rd platoon. And that first night, I probably saw several thousand of the enemy hiding behind bushes, and I mean, I was pretty jumpy. And every time I'd see something, I really didn't see anything, but I thought I saw something, I'd wake my squad leader, and he got pretty annoyed with me by the time morning came. And so the next morning was my first day in the field, and they put me on point, and it was uneventful. I did okay. They told me I did okay, and we found a couple of bags of rice, and we're up in the mountains now, up above Bong, and between Bong and the Antelope Valley. And well, anyway, the first day when I came back in for when we all came back together for the evening meal, I thought, this is not so bad. I might just make it. This is going to be okay. And so the second day, I wasn't on point, and we had a new platoon leader that had just come out. He had put in some time already in the field, and he had come out to put in the rest of his time. Officers usually put in about 6 months, and enlisted guys like me put in a year. And so we took a break on that second day, and my platoon leader saw 3 BC up on a ridge behind some trees, and he saw them, and he raised his rifle and pulled the trigger, and it went click. He had forgotten to load around. And so he said, get online and let's go get them. So being an aggressive type of soldier and wanting to do my job well, I went through this heavy brush, and I broke out into a clearing around a creek, or a little creek. And when I looked around, I was all by myself. And about the time I was beginning to wonder whether I was in the wrong place or not, one of our grenadiers walked out and walked past me and went into this creek, and then I heard automatic weapons fire. And he ran into one of these guys that our lieutenant had seen, and he came backpedaling out of there and ran past me, and I was just in front of this break in the creek, and this a VC with a weapon turned towards me and started shooting at me. And so I took my rifle and shot at him, and he missed me every time, and I hit him every time. And I could see big chunks of dark stuff coming out of the back of him, and that was pieces of his flesh. And I shot him about 6 or 7 times, and he turned and then ran on down the creek. And I thought, how in the world do you kill these guys? They don't go down. And I think later somebody said they were probably on dope. They said that was a common occurrence among the enemy, is to get people doped up to have encounters with American troops. So anyway, we got all 3 of them and broke for lunch, and we found the guy that I shot. He was still breathing, but he was laying over on the creek bank, and he died right after we got it. So anyway, I said all that to say this. By the end of the second day, I thought, this is questionable now. If every day is going to be like today, then we're in a mess. My lieutenant asked me if I would be his radio operator because his guy was going home, and I said sure. So I took the radio, didn't know anything about what I was supposed to do. And then right after I got the radio, they gave us a call that we were going on a night combat assault. So we flew out of the mountains down into the Bong Plain to reinforce one of our sister companies. And the next morning we got up. There was 27 guys in my platoon, and we split up and got on 2 tanks, and we were going to do a reconnoiter and do a fishhook maneuver, like go west and go south and then make a U-turn and come back in from behind. And we drove into the command post of the 22nd NVA Regiment, and they estimated there was 200 of them. And so we were completely surrounded, and pretty quick we got down to where only 7 or 8 guys could walk. And I was wounded, but I was wounded by a grenade, and it wasn't real bad. And the lieutenant, we were drawing heavy fire, and the lieutenant told me to get grenades from all the wounded, and I stuck them down my shirt. And he and I went into this bunker complex and started blowing up bunkers. And we were probably in there. I probably had 20 to 30 grenades down my shirt. And we encountered several face-to-face, and there was a little hand-to-hand combat involved. But anyway, I don't know how many we killed, but I know intelligence told us later we killed the intelligence officer for the regiment. And so then that night, I can remember sitting down and having some sea rations, I think. And I thought, if it's going to be like this every week, I know I'm not going to make it. So me deciding that I was not going to make it had more to do with what I had observed than how I felt.
So you said a minute ago that some of this fighting with the VC or face-to-face and even hand-to-hand. So I'm not asking for, I'm not prying and asking for unnecessary detail, but when you use that phrase hand-to-hand combat, what are you talking about?
Well, for instance, on the 5th day in the field, me and my lieutenant are in the bunker complex, and he's providing cover fire for me, and I'm throwing the grenades. And I turned around to the entrance to one of these bunkers, and there was a face there. And so when I saw that face, I had the grenade in my hand, but I hadn't pulled the pin. So I punched him in the face and knocked him back inside and threw the grenade. And some of the bunkers we'd come to, I'd throw a grenade in and they'd throw it back out. And then what I would do is get my lieutenant to throw one, and I would throw one, and they could throw one back out, but they couldn't handle two. And so that's how close we were. And that really, me punching that guy in the face was the only hand-to-hand experience I had in there. I mean, I got close to some of them, but those I just shot. I didn't actually touch them except for that one guy.
You rose very rapidly in rank, and you also were highly awarded during your year. The awards that you earned, the list I have: 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with V for Valor, 2 Silver Stars, Soldier's Medal. Am I missing anything there?
No, I don't think that's about it.
So 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star with a V for Valor, 2 Silver Stars, and a Soldier's Medal. Which of those awards means the most to you?
Well, the awards that mean the most to me are not listed there. The Combat Infantry Badge that I received is a badge for those guys who have an infantry MOS who are actually in combat, and it's silver and blue, has a flintlock rifle on it, and anybody that's in the infantry, really values that award. And so I'm proudest of that Combat Infantry Badge, because it means I was an infantry guy and I was in combat, just like infantrymen in World War I, II, Korea, and of course Vietnam. The only thing I would say is that most of the stuff I got was when I was a PFC, and when I was a Spec 4 and when I was a sergeant. So I didn't have any pull with anybody, and I don't know why. I look at it and I wonder why somebody put me in for that, but they did. Almost everything that I did was because I did it to keep our guys from getting hurt. It wasn't that I was just in a foxhole or in a trench line and I see the enemy over there and I jump up and decide I'm a killer and I'm going to go kill them. That's not what I did. It was because we were drawing too much fire and they were wounding guys, and somebody had to go out and had to eliminate the threat that was in front of us. And so I did that on more than one occasion.
Let's back up. Let's have you arriving in South Vietnam in May '67. Is it Pleiku where you arrived?
Yeah, I landed in Pleiku, was on a commercial airliner. I remember the stewardess was fairly, she was fairly up there in age. And I found out that she had become a stewardess a year before I was born. So she'd been flying 20 years before I met her there in the plane. The thing I remember most is now, right after high school, I had a job in Oklahoma City making shingles. And my job was to unload the railroad cars full of 110-pound sacks of slate. And so I worked in a hot railroad car all day long, no air conditioning, no shirt, wore the same pair of pants for 3 months. And then we had showers to get cleaned up and go home. But so I thought I had experienced heat. And when I departed the airplane there in Pleiku, I felt a heat that I had never experienced before. It was smothering. It took my breath away. And it took me a good 2 or 3 days to get to where I could even sleep, because it seemed like it was just as hot at night as it was during the daytime. And so that was what my first thought was when I stepped off the airplane is it is hot. I had some misgivings by the time I'd been out there 6 months. By this time, I'm a squad leader, and sometimes I'm the platoon sergeant if he's gone, because I outrank the other squad leaders. And so I either had 7, 8, 9 guys, or I had 35. And by the time I was out there 6 months, and I'm 20 years old. And so I not only had to contemplate what my feelings were, but I had my guys' feelings too. And honest to goodness, I wanted to make sure that they're doing an unpleasant task along with me. And so I don't want to add to their burden. So I want to do what the Army requires of me, but I also want to take care of them and not lose anybody. And thank God I never did lose. I had guys wounded, but I never lost anybody killed. So by this time, there was a couple things that I thought were stupid. No, 3 things. We were up at Docto. I guess I was a buck sergeant by this time. And our captain called all of us together, and he said, "Men, I have a directive from the White House." He said, "Whenever we're out in the field," he said, "nobody can have a round chambered, even the point man." And our standard operating procedure was the point man had a bullet chambered, and he was on full automatic, so he didn't have his safety on. The guy behind him had a round chambered, but he had his gun on safety, and that's the way everybody else was every place. And the squad leaders, every time you stopped, started out again, the squad leaders were supposed to check to make sure everybody was on safety, except for the point man. And so he said, the White House says no more rounds chambered, and we all go. That's about the stupidest thing we've ever heard. And then he said something I thought was indicative of his leadership skills. He said, that's the new rule, but he said, me and the lieutenants and the sergeants will never check. Mm-hmm. So we got the message that just keep on doing what you're doing and don't pay any attention to what I just said. Well, so I thought that was stupid that somebody in the White House was trying to direct us at company level in Vietnam, not knowing where we were or what we were up against. Because if you think about it now, I'm point guy and I'm in heavy foliage, and I break out and I run smack into an NVA, and he's 4 or 5 feet from me, and I got no round in my chamber, so I have to make noise to pull the bolt back on my M16 and then let it slide forward, and so it makes a distinct noise. But that NVA has a round chambered, and so who does it handicap?
What was the reason for that policy? I mean,
I have no idea. There wasn't a reason given for why the directive came out. Probably what happened was that somebody behind the point man probably had his weapon on full automatic and probably accidentally shot somebody, and maybe they died. I mean, at any given time, there were 75, 80,000 infantrymen out in the field. So we weren't privy to everything that happened to them every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then another thing that I was disappointed in is we would take ground from the NVA and force them off of it. And then we'd stay there a day or two, and then we'd move off of it. And give them free rein to come back into where they were. The third thing I thought was stupid was that all of us were replacements. Only the original guys that went over had trained together in the United States. And then as they lost people, replacements came in. When I came in, I came from Germany. I didn't know anybody, nobody. I met a guy on the airplane or at Oakland at the Army terminal. He was from Texas, just got married. And so we became friends there in Oakland. And we went over together and we ended up in the same company. And then, I don't know, 9 or 10 days later, after I got out to the field, his squad leader moved a door over in the sand near the ocean, and it was booby trapped. And the squad leader was named Durham. He had 9 days left in the field. So he was killed with 9 days left. Wow. Then Rufus Ray was killed immediately. And then a black kid named Johnson, it slashed him up real bad, and he screamed for. While the medic gave him some morphine, but he was still screaming. And then my buddy that I had met in Oakland, Larry Ashley, he had one of his legs blown off completely beneath the knee, and his other leg was hanging on by a piece of skin and muscle. And so they carried the dead to the helicopter, and they carried Ashley to a medevac, and I picked up his boot with his leg protruding out of it, and I went over and laid it inside the helicopter. And then I went over to my rucksack and I cried because he was my first friend. And it was really a loss for me.
You just gave some names of soldiers who either were very seriously wounded or who didn't survive the war. And there are a lot of these names. You mentioned in your memoir, you mentioned a number of soldiers who don't make it. Some killed in action, some lost their lives in accidents. The one name that maybe you spend the most amount of time on is Boshart, if I have the correct pronunciation, or Bo. And I wonder if you could tell us about Bo.
Rick Boshart, he was from a family of about 8, his Catholic family. He was from Sioux City, Iowa. And when I first got there, Boshart was the assistant gunner for a guy named Tom Kuzik. And Tom was the gunner. Boshart was the assistant gunner, and then a Eskimo Indian named Charlie Waskey was the ammo bearer. There's three guys in a machine gun crew, and so whenever we set up at night, sometimes I was close to them, sometimes I wasn't, but I got along really good with Tom Kuzik, and he really tried to show me and the other new guys how to do things so that we didn't get killed in our first couple of months there. So by the time Tom went home, then Boshart took the gun. And Rick was one of those kind of guys that you'd be laying facing the enemy, and we'd be drawing rounds, and somebody would holler at me, "Doug," and I'd look around and it'd be Boshart, and he'd say, "Where do you want the gun?" And so he was there with me, and I would tell him where to move the gun and where I wanted him to shoot. He was just one of those guys, you just counted on him. He didn't care where you sent him. He did a great job. And I had an argument around this. It must have been December 14th. My lieutenant wanted me to loan some of my guys to another sergeant so that he could go on ambush. Well, I thought this other sergeant was stupid and was dangerous and would get his guys killed, but I wasn't about to loan him his guys. So I told the lieutenant, cancel the order. I'll take my squad and I'll do the mission. I'll go on ambush. So we got into an argument. He said, you'll do what I ask you to do, or I'll get you court-martialed. I said, I don't give a shit. Didn't want to come to Vietnam anyway. What are you going to do? Court-martial me? Send me to the infantry? I'm already here. How can you make it any worse? Well, just about the time that he was really going to do it, court-martial me, Bozark stuck up his hand. He said that I'll take my machine gun and I'll go with them. And so that was the night before we got into a great big firefight. The night before Bo was killed. So we go, next morning we get on line, whole company. We got the 4th platoon on the left flank. The 3rd platoon that I was in was on the right flank. The 1st platoon was with the captain, and then the 2nd platoon was in reserve. So we start moving, going through this village called Tam Quan, and it turned out to be a 2-day battle. So we ran into a regiment there, a reinforced regiment. They had heavy weapons, and they were good soldiers. They didn't run. So we drew heavy fire all day long. And so on the right-hand side where we were drawing quite a bit of fire, but we were holding our own. And we started drawing fire from the rear. So my lieutenant said, Doug, go back there and see what's happening. So I took 2 or 3 of my guys, and we went back to the rear, and we found out that it was D Company, our sister company, had come up behind us, and they thought we were the enemy, and they were shooting. So I was hollering at them, that nobody was listening. So I took my helmet off, and I put it on my rifle, and I held my rifle up in the air, and I said, hey, we're Americans. Stop shooting. We're C Company. So they stopped. When they got close enough, they apologized. And then they went around to our left. And then they got on line, and they engaged the enemy further on down a line, but they were maybe 150 yards from us. So by the time I got back, as I was running back to get back to where I was, I heard somebody scream out, bow shot. And by the time I got back, all of my guys had surrounded the machine gun position. And what I found out was our lieutenant, who he was one of those guys that had a lot of bravado when he wasn't getting shot at. And then when he got shot at, he crawled in a hole and gave everybody orders. Well, he left Bo out there by himself with nobody to help him out. And so they overran Bo's position and they shot him. So I got the medic, and the medic came up there, and he was giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when he got shot twice in the chest, giving him mouth-to-mouth. And so then we had one of my guys got shot in the ankle, and so I took them back to and loaded them on a helicopter. And then by the time I got back after taking the second guy, they said Bo's dead. And it just hurt everybody because he was such a good guy. He had no ego about him. He just wanted to do what was right. And he was a draftee like the rest of us. And he was funny and could be serious, but he was a good soldier, really good soldier. It was a good machine gunner. And I can't tell you how many times I look over my shoulder and there he is ready for me to tell him where to go. And he never shirked an order. and we were close, and he was close to everybody, and the whole platoon was just devastated. But we lost 2 killed that day, and we lost probably 10 wounded out of our platoon. And as a company, we lost 10 killed and probably had 35 wounded. And we only had 100 guys, so that took us down to at the end of the battle on the first day, we were down to 65 men for a company.
Wow.
And our captain was gone. He hurt his knee, and his knee was swelled up as big as a basketball, and he couldn't continue. So our executive officer took over, and when he took over, he made my lieutenant the executive officer. And so when my lieutenant found out he was executive officer, he took himself out of the field and got on a helicopter and went back to the rear. And our platoon sergeant had been shot in the leg, so that made me platoon leader. And I got everybody all organized, and we were up all night because they kept trying to break out. And the next morning we went in, took care of business, and I got shot the next day.
So you've described a number of, I think stories that would, strike people as fairly heavy. And there are other stories you write about in your memoir that we haven't discussed. But you mentioned on your second day of combat, this Viet Cong guy takes shots at you, says you hit him a number of times, and you can see the impact of the bullets. You mentioned Johnson. You've got a number of soldiers who are killed. Johnson screaming for 15 minutes, and the morphine doesn't seem to have any effect. You tell the story of Bo, and there are a lot of other stories you could tell. And you say in your memoir that that it's been a while since you've had a good night's sleep. And I think a lot of combat veterans will understand that. Then you say that you would do it again in a heartbeat. And so I'm interested in, what is it that makes you say that? And I'll just, add a little bit more, and then I'm interested in your response. You often hear from combat veterans who will say that, that war, I experienced horrible things in that war, and in one way or another, maybe not in the 70s, maybe not in the 80s, but as I moved on in life, and maybe especially even as I hit retirement, I find myself thinking about it more, and that war kind of dogs me in a way, and it robs me of good sleep and things like that. You hear that kind of thing. And they will also say that though there's something about that war that they miss, for all the awfulness, there's something about it that they miss. There's something about it that would make them, if possible, do it again. So what is it? How do you explain that? All of these terrible experiences, and the sense that, well, if the opportunity came up again, I would do it again. What is your explanation for that?
Good question. First of all, war is a terrible thing. And there are some people who have a warrior mentality, and they're able to bear those bad experiences. And the way I felt about it is I volunteered for this. I'm going to do a good job no matter what. I'm not going to shame the guy in the foxhole next to me. I'm not going to run. And so consequently, I met some of the best guys I have ever known. These guys, and the ones that I was close to, these guys, if you were laying out in the middle of a rice paddy, wounded, they'd get up and come get you. Now, that's how close we were. even if we knew we were going to get killed, we'd go after you. Now, I wouldn't do that for everybody, but I would for my close knit group, and they would for me. I think it was a good war. What I saw was a lot of charity coming from the U.S. Army and other places, where they'd go out in the most remote places and they'd hold sick call, and they would drill water wells, and they would send engineers out to build houses, and we had agricultural experts to help them raise cattle and goats and sheep and all of that, and so the VC and the NBA were attempting to disrupt that and cause chaos, and so there was a constant struggle going on to win the hearts and minds of the people. That's why I would do it again. I believed in it. I never saw one atrocity committed by our guys, ever. We wouldn't have allowed that. And anytime somebody even contemplated doing something inhumane, we'd stop it. Everybody in the leadership position would. And but the brotherhood that I experienced, I miss that.